This is East Asia Tonight.
Good evening, I'm Jill Newbronner. Tonight's top stories. Taiwan's opposition leader, Cheng Li-wun, accepts Xi Jinping's invitation to visit China next month as her party, Kuomintang, persists with a block on the island's proposed $40 billion special defense bill. Donald Trump mulls seizing Iran's Kharg Island oil terminal amid fresh exchanges of strikes, even as potential ceasefire talks in Pakistan show signs of progress. Markets fluctuate amid lingering uncertainty over the fate of war. Oil continues to push higher and stocks slip. A G7 ministers holding talks in France are seeking to unpack the economic and security consequences of the conflict in the Middle East. And Indonesia's president in Japan to boost strategic ties as Tokyo seeks to lock in a key Indo-Pacific partner.
We're in Lapland, northern Finland, with a look at how the US and its NATO allies are taking steps to bolster collective security and better prepare for any potential threats here in the High North.
Also tonight, we have a special report on Arctic war drills with troops from 14 nations taking part. But first, Taiwan's main opposition leader is set to visit China next month after accepting an invitation from Chinese President Xi Jinping. The trip by Cheng Li-wun will be the first by a sitting Kuomintang chairperson to China since 2016 and comes as Taiwan's proposed extra defense budget worth $40 billion remains stalled in the opposition-held parliament. U.S. lawmakers visiting Taipei have urged for a swift approval to the spending bill, warning that delays could weaken the island's ability to deter Chinese military pressure, despite American support.
We want to make sure that as we invest in this part of the world, that you are also investing and that we're in this together.
两岸关系重中之重，非常重要。对美关系尤其如此。这中间不需要牺牲任何一边的关系或利益，才能成就两岸的和平。 才能维系跟美国之间坚实的友谊。
CNA's senior correspondents join us live. Victoria Jen is in Taipei, Tan Yuguan in Shanghai. Now, Victoria, if we could just start with you. For Taiwan, how politically significant is this trip?
Well, the KMT says the goal is simple, and that is to restart communications with China. They're talking about things like tourism, trade, and exchanges, which have been frozen for years. And they want to show that talking to Beijing is still possible. But the timing is what's making this sensitive. Right now, Taiwan's parliament is stuck in a deadlock over a $40 billion defense budget. President William Lai's government says this money is urgently needed to strengthen Taiwan's defenses, especially with growing pressure from China. So critics are asking if this visit sends the wrong message. It comes at a time when Taiwan is trying to boost its military, but the opposition is reaching out to Beijing. And there are also concerns that this could make it even harder to pass that budget because the two sides are already deeply divided. But the KMT argues that keeping dialogue open and strengthening defense can happen at the same time. Now, beyond policy, there's also politics, especially with local elections coming up. For the KMT, this trip could help them show voters they can keep things stable with China and avoid conflict. That message can appeal to some voters. But for the ruling DPP, this also gives them an opening. They can argue that the KMT is getting too close to Beijing, especially at a time when tensions are high. So this trip is not just about ties with China. It's also part of a bigger political fight at home. And it could shape how both sides campaign in the next local elections.
All right, let's go to Shanghai. And Yuguan, you heard Victoria there talking about the significance of the timing of this trip when it comes to the budget and when it comes to upcoming elections. But could it also be significant coming so close to Donald Trump's visit to Beijing in May?
That's right. I mean, Beijing's invitation to the KMT chair does look very carefully timed, doesn't it? I mean, after all, Trump's trip was originally supposed to happen a bit earlier. And with that delayed, it seems now that Beijing has the space to lay the groundwork to put out its position on Taiwan on the table before Xi meets Trump. And the message is fairly clear. China wants to show that it's still on talking terms with somebody in Taiwan, not through President William Lai's government. Beijing still refuses to deal with that administration, but through KMT. And from Beijing's point of view, that also reinforces another point, that Taiwan is a domestic issue and not something Washington should be tempted to treat as an external bargaining chip. Then there is the itinerary. I think the itinerary is just full of symbolism, and it seems rather deliberate. Nanjing is important because it connects the KMT to its historical roots on the mainland. It was the capital of the nationalist government in China, and it is the home to the Sun Yat-sen mausoleum on Purple Mountain. I've been there myself, climbing up Purple Mountain to Sun Yat-sen's tomb, and you really get a sense of how carefully that KMT history has been preserved by authorities on the mainland. And Sun Yat-sen carries meaning on both sides of the strait. Mainlanders see him as the pioneer of the Chinese Revolution that overthrew the Qing dynasty, and the KMT sees him as the founding father of the Republic of China. So a stop in Nanjing sends a message that the two sides share a historical and cultural inheritance, even if they are not one politically today. Then there's Shanghai, right? It has a strong Taiwanese business presence, so Beijing can use that stop to highlight the economic links that still bind the two sides. It also helps China showcase the incentives it's offered to Taiwanese over the years, things like residence permit, easier services, easier access to services, and policies meant to make it simpler to live and work in the mainland. So taken together, this visit looks like Beijing trying to shake the narrative before Trump arrives.
All right, many thanks to both CNA senior correspondents, Victoria Jent in Taipei and Tan Yuguan in Shanghai. Well, Donald Trump has raised the idea of U.S. forces seizing Iran's main oil terminal in the Persian Gulf, Kharg Island. The American leader told the Financial Times that taking the island is among the options available, and that doing so will mean the U.S. has to remain there for, quote, a while. This comes as the New York Times reports hundreds of U.S. Special Operations Forces being deployed to the Middle East, adding to the 50,000 troops already in the region and raising fears of a U.S. ground invasion. Now, Mr. Trump adding to the uncertainty, giving mixed signals on potential talks to end the war.
I would only say that we're doing extremely well in that negotiation, but you never know with Iran because we negotiate with them, and then we always have to blow them up.
Meanwhile, Israel and Iran continue to trade strikes, with explosions reported in both countries. Tehran is warning of retaliatory attacks after state media reported attacks against its energy infrastructure. City authorities say electricity has been restored after overnight strikes on power facilities plunged parts of the capital into darkness. Across the Persian Gulf, Kuwait says a power and water desalination plant was damaged in an Iranian attack, which killed an Indian national worker. Abu Dhabi and Bahrain also saying their aluminium plants were targeted. Well, despite the continuing fighting, there were signs of progress for a diplomatic solution. The region's top diplomats gathered in Pakistan over the weekend, with talks focused on reopening the Strait of Hormuz. Pakistan says Iran agreed to let 20 more Pakistani-flagged tankers through its blockade of an energy shipping choke point. Hira Mustafa for CNA has more on Islamabad's mediation efforts.
Pakistan's Foreign Minister Ishaq Dar, after holding consultations with his Saudi, Egyptian and Turkish counterparts on Sunday, said the talks were fruitful in a televised address to the nation. He added that the foreign ministers discussed ways to bring an early end to the ongoing conflict in the Middle East, emphasizing that war serves no one's interest. They stressed the importance of unity among Muslim countries during these challenging times and reaffirmed their commitment to the principles of the UN Charter, including respect for sovereignty and territorial integrity. In a significant move, the top diplomats agreed to form a committee of senior officials from their respective foreign ministries to work out a coordinated approach to the crisis through mutual understanding and consensus. Dar confirmed that both Iran and Washington trust Pakistan to mediate and said Islamabad is leveraging its ties with the United States to help facilitate a solution. However, analysts caution that these peace efforts could easily collapse if attacks by either Iran or the US continue. And if that happens, Islamabad's role as an intermediary could be severely challenged. As well, there are concerns that because Pakistan has defense agreement with Saudi Arabia, it could be seen as siding with Riyadh, a long-time rival of Iran, hence raising the stakes for Islamabad in this escalating regional crisis. For CNA, I am Hira Mustafa in Islamabad.
Now, G7 ministers are holding talks in France, seeking to contain the economic fallout of the conflict as oil and gas prices continue to soar. The meeting will include energy and finance ministers as well as central bank chiefs and other heads of international agencies, and a format that the French finance minister says has not been used for 50 years. Well, let's get more now. Ross Cullen for CNA joining us live from Paris. Ross, now these are critical talks. What is the expectations that will come out of them?
Yes, Jill, those online talks are getting underway in under an hour now. The reunion of finance ministers, energy ministers and also central bank chiefs. Just got a note here from the French finance ministry confirming that video call, saying, quote, this illustrates the will of France to respond to a crisis in which the repercussions are inextricably linked to energy and the economy. Now, because you have so many interests coming together, finance departments, energy departments and central bank governors, it is perhaps unlikely there will be formal measures announced. There will be official decisions taken and perhaps a joint communique released. We're not expecting a sudden decision to announce oil price caps, for example, or perhaps even another release of strategic hydrocarbon reserves. But the fact that they are holding this joint meeting does demonstrate the seriousness with which France, as the country that holds the rotating presidency of the G7, is taking the economic and energy ramifications of the conflicts.
Well, serious also is the need to address some of those knock-on effects from the blockade of the Strait of Hormuz as well.
Yeah, that's right, Jill. Something that is worrying European Union agriculture ministers is perhaps food prices and food supply further down the line this year because of the current hold-up of fertilizers, which are usually transported out of the Gulf and through the Strait of Hormuz regularly for use by the agriculture sector. There have been specific measures taken by different European Union member states. We've seen Ireland and Italy try to slash the cost of fuel. We've seen Spain announce a multi-billion-dollar package to prop up its economy from the impacts of the war as well. And we know that here in France, they've had a similar measure to that imposed in Hungary, also trying to cap the amount at which petrol or gasoline can be sold to consumers to try to protect the public from those wider impacts of the war in Iran. Jill?
All right, appreciate that. Thank you so much, Ross Cullen for CNA in Paris. Coming up on East Asia tonight, South Korea could soon tighten driving rules for everyone if oil prices keep climbing amid rising Middle East tensions. Plus, Asian economies fall back on coal as the Iran conflict disrupts energy supplies, driving up prices, boosting miners, and raising fresh concerns over pollution and climate goals.
We roll out what we call the cross-border rewards redemption. If you have an eligible uni-dollar UOB credit card and you have accumulated enough uni-dollars, you will be able to use these points to offset your purchases at more than 150 shopping outlets in Johor.
For anyone who's planning a weekend trip to Johor, what's your tip?
Take your UOB card with you. Whether you want to tap, scan, or use your points, it is your decision.
More young investors are choosing gold, but should they? She didn't just travel to all the countries of the world, she built a financial system that funded it. Plus, would you buy a home you might outlive if it meant paying less every month? Money Mind, Wednesday on CNA.
Saturday on Japan Hour. Cycle around Oita, where you will meet a few good men. Keeping traditions alive. Inventing new ways. All for the good of their community. Japan Hour, Saturday on CNA.
Japan Hour is brought to you by Sumitomo Corporation. MUFG, committed to empowering a brighter future. Zip Air, no fuel surcharge from 216 Singapore dollars. And IHI.
Asia experiences some of the world's most powerful typhoons almost every year.
Shall I make a run with the camera?
Yeah.
Each typhoon presents itself as this set of problems which need to be overcome. My job is to figure out this complex puzzle.
This is getting really, really dangerous.
Scientists and storm chasers put their lives on the line to predict these storms.
Size ng eye, ilang kilometer? Makilagay ngayong latest, yung mas malino na forecast track.
And protect the public before it's too late.
那么接下来将会进入到台风防御的关键期。
Worst case scenario is super typhoon category.
We gotta go, man. Big winds coming.
The Typhoon Detectives, decoding the next big typhoon. Premiering April 4, Saturday on CNA.
Welcome back. Just in time for the business news with Roland Lim. And Roland, you're going to take us through another choppy start to the East Asian week.
Unfortunately, Jill, yes. President Trump saying he could seize Kharg Island on the Persian Gulf, where Iran exports much of the oil, but also at the same time saying a ceasefire could come quickly. Crude futures extending their gains, Brent and the West Texas Intermediate both at their highest since July 22, when Russia invaded Ukraine, with Yemen's Houthis now joining the war and threatening another trade route. Brent is headed for a record monthly rise. Investors are also keeping a close eye on how the war could reshape traffic along the Straits of Hormuz. State media reports that Iranian lawmakers have proposed legislation to collect tolls from vessels crossing the world's single most important oil and shipping route. But even before the proposal is enacted, Iran's Revolutionary Guards is said to have already set a so-called toll system in place. Data from maritime intelligence firm Lloyd's List show a subtle but significant change in the flow of traffic. This blue line traces the route previously used by roughly a fifth of global oil flows from the Middle East. Since as early as March 15th, Lloyd's List tracking showed a few ships allowed to cross, taking a slight detour around Larak Island to enter Iranian waters. But cheap ships need to go through a strict vetting process before they're allowed passage. Lloyd's List sources say operators must first contact Revolutionary Guard intermediaries and to submit all details about the vessel. This includes crew names, the cargo it carries, and the final destination. Now, that data is vetted by the Revolutionary Guard's Naval Command. The operators are given a code and instructions on the route they must have to take. An escort boat guides the vessel through the narrow corridor around Larak, where final screening test determines whether or not the vessel is allowed to pass the strait. An Iranian lawmaker has told media they have been charging as much as $2 million to pass. Now, Lloyd's reports at least 2 payments were made in Chinese yuan. It is unclear whether all ships that were allowed to transit have been asked to pay tolls. Stocks in the region tumbled after the price of oil rose again, with no end in sight to the war in the Middle East. The Kospi leading the declines, ending the day 3% lower, 5,277 points. Japan's Nikkei also ending the day 3% in the red after slipping more than 5% in earlier trade. The yen strengthened after Japan's top currency diplomat issued the strongest warning yet of yen buying intervention. Mr. Atsushi Mimura warned a decisive action by the government might soon be necessary, which experts say is widely understood as signaling intervention. Mr. Mimura spoke after the yen slid past 160 per dollar late last week, its weakest since Japan's market intervention back in July 2024. Following his remarks, the currency edged stronger to 159.73. Separately, Bank of Japan Governor Kazuo Ueda said that policymakers would closely monitor yen moves and their impact on the economy and prices. Analysts say that signals weaker currency-driven inflation could justify interest rate hikes in the coming months. Moving on to the markets on the mainland, the Shanghai Composite managing to hold on to gains up 0.24%. Second best, the Shenzhen component went the other way. It's down 0.25%. And the Hang Seng Index is down 0.8% today. Morningstar's Director of Equity Research for Asia says market sentiment hinges on how long the uncertainty in the Middle East will last.
So it all depends on what your time frame is that you expect the war to be resolved. So our view has been that, that it will be there will be a resolution within, the second quarter, let's say the next month or so, and that this would be a relatively shorter event. And I think as long as the Straits of Hormuz can be secured or reopened to a flow of energy, that would actually resolve a lot of the uncertainty that's and risk to the global economy right now. So if you base it on that the supplies are not diminished in any sense in terms of the production facilities, then we should expect the price of Brent to ease back towards $65 at year end. But the problem is that the risk premium that we're seeing in oil prices at the moment just reflects that we don't really know whether it's going to be a 1 month scenario or a 3 month scenario. Obviously, so if it lasts longer, the macro risks are much greater.
And South Korea is considering tougher measures to deal with soaring oil prices as tensions linked to Iran continue to rattle global energy markets. Finance Minister says driving restrictions may be expanded to the general public if oil prices climb above $120 a barrel. The government has already limited car use among civil servants, restricting access to government buildings based on license plate numbers. Now, extending this to private drivers would mark the first time such a move was made since the 1991 Gulf War. President Lee Jae-myung has urged citizens to cut power use and to rely more on public transport, warning of potential energy shortages. The country, heavily dependent on Middle Eastern oil imports, faces rising inflation risks and slower growth as crude prices surge. Despite steady export growth, higher energy costs and disrupted shipping are adding pressure to South Korea's trade-reliant economy. As conflict in the Middle East drives up global oil prices, Australia is moving to cushion the impact at home. The government will halve its fuel excise duties on petrol and diesel for 3 months in a bid to ease mounting cost of living pressures. The move cuts the tax by about 26 Australian cents per litre. That's about 17 US cents. The government is urging retailers to pass on the savings to consumers at the pump. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese says that the temporary relief comes as households face rising fuel costs and supply disruptions linked to the conflict.
We're making fuel cheaper today because we understand that Australians are under serious pressure. However, we really also want to encourage Australians who can to take public transport to help save fuel for the areas and industries that need it. And I note a couple of the jurisdictions have taken action to reduce public transport fares as well. The less fuel we use in the cities, obviously the more we can direct to regional areas that are under pressure.
The policy is expected to save motorists roughly 12 US cents on a full tank, but will cost the federal budget roughly $1.6 billion in lost revenue. Economists warn the measure is only a short-term fix and could even push up demand and strain supplies further if global shortages persist. Authorities say the measure is short-term and is part of a broader plan to manage inflation risks while avoiding steps like rationing. Roger Maynard is covering this story for CNA from Sydney. He tells us more about the measures Australian states have imposed to help motorists.
Motorists should enjoy the benefit almost immediately, and petrol companies will face big fines if they don't pass on the cut in fuel tax. Judging from my own travels over the past 24 hours, it looks like the service stations are behaving themselves and all charging roughly the same price. But it's a measure of the financial pain Australians are suffering at the moment, caused by higher petrol bills and a shortage of fuel at the pumps, that the government has decided to intervene. A lot of service stations in rural areas and some cities have run dry, and those that are still operating have had to increase their prices to reflect the skyrocketing price of oil on international markets because of the war in the Middle East. This has sent shockwaves through Australia, with many motorists resorting to panic buying, which is only adding to the problems. The government insists there's no real shortage of fuel as such, but because some motorists are needlessly topping up their tanks, the pumps are running low quicker than normal. There have also been cases of car owners driving off from garages without paying, and some siphoning off petrol from other vehicles. In addition to all this, 2 state governments have decided to allow free public transport. In Victoria, passengers will be allowed to travel free on trains, trams and buses until July to ease the financial strain, and much the same is happening in Tasmania. But Western Australia and New South Wales have said no to the idea, with the New South Wales Government Transport Minister saying he wants to keep his powder dry to deal with the crisis if it lasts much longer than a month.
Asian countries are reportedly turning to coal as the Iran war upends global energy supplies. Restricted LNG flows from the Middle East, especially Qatar, where strikes have hit a major production hub, are pushing economies to switch to coal for power generation. India is ramping up coal use to meet peak summer demand, while Japan has temporarily lifted limits on older, less efficient coal plants. South Korea has also eased restrictions, and Indonesia is prioritizing domestic supply. Thailand, the Philippines and Vietnam are increasing coal-fired generation as well. But the shift risks worsening air pollution, slowing the transition to renewables and raising carbon emissions. According to the benchmark tracking, thermal coal prices in the Asia-Pacific prices have risen more than 25% since the Mid-East war began. And shares of Australian coal miners have jumped. Australia is the world's second biggest exporter of thermal coal. In the past month, Yancoal is up 40%, while Whitehaven and New Hope more than 20% higher. And that is the latest in business. Jill.
Much appreciated, Roland. Thank you. And coming up on East Asia tonight, how weekend strikes on Israel by Yemeni Houthi rebels could mark a significant escalation, which may further worsen a global energy crunch. And Indonesia's president on his first official visit to Japan, seeking to deepen ties with one of Jakarta's closest partners.
The weather brought to you by Nippon Paint.
Washable, anti-mold, durable, strong coverage. Nippon Paint Odorless, Singapore's most popular paint brand.
This is East Asia Tonight. Here are the headlines we're following. Taiwan's opposition leader Cheng Li-wun set to visit China next month after accepting an invitation from Chinese President Xi Jinping. The trip will be the first by a sitting Kuomintang chair to China since 2016. Donald Trump floats the option of seizing Iran's main oil hub, Kharg Island, amid a reported deployment of more U.S. troops to the Middle East, further raising fears of an American ground invasion. And the uncertainty over the war causing oil prices to rise yet again and stocks in East Asia to fall. Japan's Nikkei and South Korea's Kospi ending the day 3% in the red. Indonesia's president is in Japan, aiming to deepen ties with one of Jakarta's closest partners. And this is Prabowo Subianto's first official visit to Tokyo. He has met Japanese Emperor Naruhito and will be holding talks with Prime Minister Sanai Takaichi. Now, the two nations signed deals on critical minerals and nuclear energy in early March on the sidelines of the Indo-Pacific Energy Security Ministerial and Business Forum. Well, our Indonesia correspondent, Chatni Vatvani, joins us live from Jakarta with more on this trip. Now, Chatni, there are many crucial issues on the table in Japan. How's the trip been progressing?
Well, Jill, certainly a very packed agenda there for President Prabowo Subianto on his first official visit to Tokyo, and it comes nearly 2 years after taking office. We know that he's been accompanied by a number of ministers from his red and white cabinet. And while the group arrived at Haneda Airport on Sunday night, he paid a courtesy visit to Japanese Emperor Naruhito on Monday. And according to the Presidential Secretariat, President Prabowo was greeted by Emperor Naruhito upon his arrival at the Imperial Palace. And in fact, this visit also at the invitation of the Emperor. We know the two had a group photo session and then continued on with a private meeting and a state luncheon. And they are said to have discussed strategic issues of mutual interest to both Indonesia and Japan. Now, after meeting with Emperor Naruhito, the president attended the Japan-Indonesia Business Forum, which was also attended by a Japanese government delegation. And we also know that the president is scheduled to meet with Japanese PM Sanai Takaichi. And that meeting is expected to provide a strategic opportunity to strengthen cooperation in various fields, including investment, energy, maritime affairs, and digital technology. Previously, we know that State Secretary Prasetyo Hadi said that the main focus of these discussions would be trade and technology transfers, along with strengthening education quality and forestry and environmental issues also high on their agenda. Now, in addition to all of this diplomatic agenda, the president is also expected to witness the signing of several investment agreements aimed at boosting national economic growth.
Now, Prabowo continues with a visit to South Korea. Is it an equally packed agenda expected on that leg?
That's right. After Japan, President Prabowo is scheduled to visit South Korea, where he will meet with President Lee Jae-myung. Discussions there are expected to be multifold as well. Various strategic cooperation ranging from trade to investment, defense and security, and even AI. But other issues like infrastructure, shipbuilding, nuclear energy and energy transition are also reportedly on the agenda. And then there's also discussions on cultural cooperation and efforts to strengthen ties between South Korea and ASEAN, reportedly on the agenda as well. And finally, also discussions expected on global issues such as international security. So we will be keeping a close eye on all of these discussions.
Jadi Vavani from Jakarta, many thanks for that. Yemen's Houthis have opened a new front in the war, with strikes on Israel over the weekend marking a significant escalation in the month-long conflict. There are concerns this could put another key shipping lane, the Bab al-Mandeb, at risk. Stephen Heidemann, Director of Middle East Studies at Smith College, explains the possible disruptions.
It would amplify the economic effects of the war. It would make it even more difficult to maintain the global shipping routes that flow around the Horn into the Red Sea through the Suez Canal. They were disrupted in previous episodes of conflict and at huge cost to the global economy, and that could well happen again. So far, it's quite interesting that the Houthis have not exercised that option. They have not taken steps to try to take action against shipping lanes in their coastal waters. They have targeted Israel, but they have not gone beyond that, and it suggests that the Houthis are calibrating fairly carefully how deeply they want to be involved in this conflict. I think, first, the Houthis do have the capacity. They have ballistic missiles, they have drones, they have weapons that give them the capability of disrupting shipping. The threat of disruption may be sufficient to bring shipping almost to a halt. We've seen that in the Straits of Hormuz. It is principally the threat that Iran might take action, might attack shipping that moves through the straits, that has led to an almost complete shutdown of movement through those straits. So in some respects, it would be enough, perhaps, for the Houthi leadership to make clear that they intended to disrupt shipping lanes for them to achieve the result that they set out to achieve.
So Pakistan has become an unexpected mediator in the Middle East conflict, offering to bring both the US and Iran to the negotiating table. Let's take a look at its unique position to do just that. The Gulf nations have previously facilitated negotiations between Washington and Tehran, but many have since come under Iranian drone and missile attacks. Geographically, Pakistan is now emerging as a suitable intermediary because of its border with Iran. Now, proximity, though, not the only indicator for brokering peace. It is important to note that Pakistan holds a rare status as one of the few countries maintaining a relationship with both the US and Iran. It's also not an active participant in the conflict and does not host any US military bases. Now, Pakistan has a history of facilitating high-profile diplomacy. In 1971, Pakistan helped broker a secret US-China-backed channel. Now, this eventually paved the way for US President Richard Nixon's historic visit to Beijing the year after, helping the US and China establish formal ties. Then, in 1988, Pakistan was a key negotiator in the Geneva Accords that led to the Soviet withdrawal from Afghanistan. And more recently, in 2022, Islamabad leveraged its influence over Taliban leadership to bring them to the negotiating table with the US. Now, this resulted in the Doha Agreement. That situation, though, has since changed as Pakistan and the Afghan Taliban remain locked in a war themselves. Earlier, Asia First spoke with Samina Yasmin from the University of Western Australia, who shares how, with Iran allowing more Pakistani boats to pass through Hormuz, solidifies Islamabad's position as facilitator.
From Pakistani point of view, because they've already been communicating to the Iranian government that they do want to play a role of an honest facilitator, not necessarily a mediator, but facilitator. And Iranian government has already shown signs of listening to Pakistan, as Pakistan being one of the countries who has been allowed to get their ships through the Strait of Hormuz. It is quite possible that Pakistan, when it talks about these issues, Iran is going to show some little bit more flexibility, as it has shown to other countries too. But Pakistan sharing the border with Iran, I think it becomes more important. But there's also another point. I think from an Iranian point of view, it's very clear that in the last year or so, Pakistan's relationship with the United States, particularly President Trump, has improved a lot. And so there is a sense that Pakistan may be able to at least convince the Iranian government to show some signs of flexibility and open the Strait of Hormuz. And I think we can see there already been signs to that effect, that the Iranian government has shifted and said friendly countries would be allowed. So Pakistan, as part of that friendly country group, has a capacity to shape what happens. But again, there's limits to that, because what Pakistan tells Iran and what Iran agrees to do, but then what happens between Israel and Americans and their future plans in the region, that could actually put everything back to exactly where it's starting from.
So that begs the question, can Pakistan be truly neutral, given it has a skin in the game?
I think Pakistan doesn't have to be neutral. It has to be someone who knows that settling the situation, bringing it to some level of stability is important for it, and it's important for its allies in the region. Let's not forget that Pakistan has signed an agreement with the Saudi Arabian government, and that was very closely after the Field Marshal Asim Munir had visited the United States and met President Trump. So that relationship solidifies Pakistan's interest in making sure that Saudi Arabia is safe. And at the same time, because Pakistan gets the gas, for example, from Qatar, and also has very strong relationship with other Middle Eastern countries, it is in Pakistan's interest to make sure that the situation changes in the region. So from that point of view, it does have a skin in the game, but it also has a very strong interest in making sure that it brings the parties together to some form of agreement, which doesn't meet everyone's requirement, but also brings the situation to a level that we don't move into the direction of a greater regional instability.
Coming up on East Asia Tonight, NATO ramping up its defense capabilities in the Arctic as the US questions its willingness to protect American interests from the Middle East to the High North. And Pakistan's youth turn to online gaming to make ends meet as youth unemployment increases.
Along South Sulawesi's coastline, the growth of an industry that's transforming villages and feeding a global market.
Indonesia, we are the second largest producer of seaweed in the world.
But producing the raw material alone isn't enough.
Di China kan banyak pabrik yang sejenis, tentunya harga tentu bersaing juga.
How will Indonesia diversify and unlock the true value of its green gold? Wednesday on CNA.
Singapore Management University shapes graduates who think critically, act decisively, and lead with purpose. Our research advances industries, influences policies and solutions for society. Our partnerships build bridges across Asia and the world. What begins here changes lives. What we do here changes the world. Singapore Management University. Bold ideas, big impact.
We are in the midst of a rupture.
Even if this war winds down relatively quickly, there are likely to be continued reprisals from Iran. It is right for Indo-Pacific partners to worry that not only may American attention, but resources be sucked into the Middle East for not just a few more weeks, but months or even years as a result of this operation.
Japan will always say that the United States is its greatest security ally. But if we scratch the surface, there is a lot of hedging on the part of Japan.
With the war that we see in the Middle East, there will be questions about how it all began and the way it panned out.
The South Koreans feel you can't make a deal with Trump and have it be reliable.
The first thing in the morning as Asia wakes up to a new day. Get up to speed with major events shaping lives in the region and other parts of the world.
Putting things in perspective with eye-opening reports and expert analysis as a new era of global politics breeds power struggles and shifting alliances.
We get to the heart of the matter and take stock of the issues you're invested in with on-the-ground reports and wall-to-wall coverage. Viewing it all from a regional lens because we put Asia first.
NATO is ramping up its defense capabilities in the Arctic as the US questions its willingness to protect its interests from the Middle East to the High North. Now, the alliance insists its support is ironclad, with more than a dozen members holding Arctic drills in a show of force and solidarity. William Denslow has more for CNA from Rovaniemi in northern Finland.
Ensuring that any potential invaders are met with a frosty reception, be it by air, sea, cyberspace, or on snow-covered ground. Some 32,000 personnel from 14 NATO member nations recently took part in joint military exercises across northern Norway and Finland, in an operation known as Cold Response 26.
It creates a unique opportunity for mostly the staff, battalion staff, to train and to be a part of something bigger.
It's one thing to have stuff, but we need to be able to use them and to use them in a combined context as well.
Cold Response 26 is the first NATO exercise conducted under Arctic Sentry. It was launched in February to bolster the alliance's capabilities in the High North.
These types of exercises where we can, just this venue that we have around us here, where you can see all the equipment that we have here, soldiers interacting, building trust, that's what the alliance is about, stronger together.
The force involved more than 7,000 soldiers from countries including the US, UK and France, deployed here for both live training and large-scale simulations. The drills are conducted under an Article 5 scenario, meaning that an attack on one NATO ally is an attack on all. For soldiers here, a major focus of these exercises is on adaptation to this harsh environment. Temperatures can drop to as low as around minus 30 degrees Celsius. It's considerably warmer today, but those here say that these wetter conditions can pose even greater challenges. Soldiers say that coordination and knowledge sharing with allies is essential, especially under foreign conditions.
NATO has planning processes and integration procedures and how we do those things, but actually doing the exercise and doing it with live partners instead of worrying about how we wrote it down on a piece of paper helps bridge the gap between what's on paper and building the relationship in person for the future fight.
Some of the drills here may be staged, but officials say the threat is real. The US has criticised NATO for failing to do enough to address the rising presence of Russia and China in the Arctic region, an area increasing in strategic value as melting sea ice opens up fresh opportunities for shipping and resource extraction. Attention may have turned to the Middle East in recent weeks, but Professor of Political History at the University of Helsinki, Juhana Oesloma, says Washington's interest in the High North remains.
It's a little bit of a more slow-moving game in the north than, for example, what we have with Iran or other flashpoints elsewhere in the world. So I think when the Americans, how they see the North is they are playing the long game, and this is the way also the Chinese and the Russians see it.
NATO's objective is clear: to ensure it has the capabilities to defend every inch of its territory, including this one. With war games like this helping to sharpen its vigilance and better prepare the alliance to protect this frozen terrain, should geopolitical tensions boil over. For CNA, I'm William Denslow in Rovaniemi, northern Finland.
Now, for more coverage on the intensifying geopolitical interest in the Arctic region, do head on over to our website, cna.asia, or if you prefer, you can follow the latest on our mobile app. Youth unemployment is a major concern in Pakistan. Many of its young citizens struggling to find work are turning to online gaming as an alternative source of income. World Bank President Ajay Banga has warned the country must create up to 30 million jobs over the next 10 years or risk economic instability. Hira Mustafa filed this report for CNA from Islamabad.
The pressure to win is intense. 25-year-old Hamza is the sole breadwinner in a family of 5. Every online gaming match he wins means he takes home extra money that day. A trained engineer, Hamza works 7 hours a day at an IT company, but spends whatever time he can gaming.
Studying for 4 to 5 years in the university and getting a degree out of it, and that will just get you a basic salary of 40 to 50,000 at the very max. But investing for 4 years in the esports industry, you can make easily 400 or to 500K a month.
In a country where traditional jobs are limited and salaries barely cover basic living costs, gaming and online competitions are becoming a big draw among young people looking for new ways to earn. Sponsorships, team salaries, prize money, and streaming. Professional online gamers have multiple revenue streams to tap into.
International esports companies used to pay us in dollars, and that currency difference was a very big motivation for us because we have a very less and very low profile currency.
Esports is a fast-growing multi-billion-dollar industry, and in Pakistan it's expanding, fueled by a large young population looking to earn a living. More than half of the people in the country are under the age of 30. But Pakistan is struggling to tap into this immense demographic potential. Government data shows the number of unemployed people increased by 1.4 million in the last 5 years. The World Bank chief says the country needs to generate 2.5 million to 3 million jobs a year over the next decade to turn its large youth population into an economic dividend or risk instability and outward migration. And signs of strain may already be emerging. According to Gallup Pakistan data based on official figures, nearly 4,000 doctors left the country last year, the highest annual outflow on record.
And that is something that economists are worried about a lot these days. The fact of the matter is that Pakistan has already suffered from a lot of brain drain. We've lost a lot of professionals to other countries such as in North America and then also in Europe. It can become a really big problem.
The government says it is working to generate more employment while also trying to help young people acquire skills that employers want. It expects more than 1.6 million jobs to be created this year.
The government has launched many skill development programs to give the new graduate skills or international certification, be it related to digital ITC, that or other areas, be it banking, be it the food sector, health in the health sector. So there are multiple programs which are enabling youth to get employed in the market.
Whether that will be enough to address the scale of joblessness remains unclear. Some of those employed, like Hamza, are also asking the government to urgently fix what they call is the problem of low wages. The average monthly salary in the country is around $140, which they say is not enough to keep up with the cost of living. So even with a formal job, Hamza says he has no choice but to game on. For CNA, I'm Hera Mustafa in Islamabad.
Air China has resumed direct flights between Beijing and Pyongyang after a 6-year halt due to the COVID pandemic. Now, the airline has reportedly stopped taking further bookings and future flights had not been confirmed, with an analyst citing possible high fuel costs for that move. Now, the return of Air China flights between Beijing and Pyongyang comes after the resumption of passenger train services between the two capital cities. Before the pandemic, Chinese tour groups accounted for close to 90% of all international visitors, but North Korea continues to remain largely closed to foreign tourism, with few exceptions, such as for some Russian tour groups under restricted arrangements. Well, that's Monday's edition of East Asia Tonight. Don't forget headlines anytime at cna.asia, or you can check us out on Facebook and YouTube. Bye-bye.